Hello and welcome to this presentation on the Education Studies course here at Liverpool Hope University. My name is Dr. Cathal Shukru, and in this presentation what I hope to do is to give you some idea of who we are here in the Education Studies department and what sort of course we're offering. I'll talk a bit about who the course might appeal to so you can get a sense of if it's going to fit you and your interests. I'll also talk about what sort of content is in the course, the topics we look at each year and the kind of assessments we use. I'll try to give you some idea of the career paths that lead out from our course post-graduation, as well as talking a bit about some of the extras, the extracurricular activities and trips that we include as part of our studies here. I hope that by the end of this presentation you get a little bit of a sense of who we are and why you might want to come and study with us. One of the first points I want to make is that when we talk about studying education, we're talking about more than just school. It's understandable that when we say education, most people think of school because that has to be the one single biggest educational opportunity that most of us have in our life. We go to school for such a large chunk of the early portion of our life, and it's the bit that's most often highlighted as your education, the education system. That, not surprisingly, it is the one thing that almost everybody thinks of when you ask them about where education occurs or where you can work as an educator. But what we hope to show you in our course is that actually, while school is the most visible aspect of education in society, there are many other places in which we receive an education, in which we are helped by other people to grow and change and to learn. And as such, by studying education not just in school and elsewhere, we hope to show that these other places where education occurs can teach us something about education that we might not figure out if we just looked at school. But it also hopefully will open your eyes when you study with us to the other opportunities that are out there for you post-graduation if you want to be an educator. While many of our graduates do go on to become teachers, many of them are very successful in doing that, there are just as many who realise that there are other ways to scratch that itch, other ways to be an educator and help people to learn out there in the world that don't involve school. If you come to study education with us, where will you be studying and how do we approach the study of education? The first of those questions is definitely the easier one to answer. Education Studies is located in the Eden Block on the Hope Park campus, which is in the Childwall suburb of Liverpool. And we're part of the School of Education alongside other subjects such as early childhood and initial teacher education. How we approach the study of education is that we take what we call a disciplinary approach, and what that means is that we try to understand education using 4 different disciplines, which you can see listed here on the screen: psychology, sociology, philosophy and history. The reason we do it this way is we think that each of these disciplines adds something important to our understanding of education. I'll try to give you some examples. We don't think that you can understand why the education system is the way it is unless you think about what its role is in society. Unless you think about what society expects from the education system, for example, what does it expect graduates from school to be able to do, what should they be able to contribute to society, you won't really understand why the education system is set up the way it is. And it's through the study of sociology that you'll get that understanding of society and the job that the education system is expected to do in it. But how the education system is today is really only a reflection in part of events in the past. There have been major events in this country's history which have shaped the education system, and it's only through the study of history that you'll understand why these events still have an impact on education today, and how sometimes it's the stories we tell about the past as much as what actually happened there which can shape current events. Sometimes though, some of the reasons we do what we do in education are based on such fundamental beliefs that it's really only through philosophy that you get down to that kind of level and really understand them. For example, you could say that the purpose of education, what education is there for, is not just about what society expects, but also what each of us think life is about. And it's only really through philosophy that you get to tackle those really important and major beliefs such as why are we here or what is the purpose of education. Last but not least, my own discipline of psychology is the one that helps us to understand a bit more about how people think, what motivates them, why they remember, why they forget, how they relate to each other. And we feel that these are key questions and key issues that any educator needs to understand if they really want to get to grips with learning and teaching. So this is just some examples of why we use this disciplinary approach to help us study education. Let's look now at how the course will be delivered. We use several different types of classes, and these classes are different not just in terms of their size but also the purpose for each class. So for example, the largest type of class we use a lecture, where it's one staff member delivering a presentation to the entire year. These are intended to give an overview, the bigger picture if you like, for the topic of the week, to help you get a grounding in that topic and understand it before you start going into more depth on it. And then it's in the tutorials and seminars that you tend to go into that more detail. So the tutorials and seminars, we tend to break up that year into smaller groups, one staff member for every 25 students typically in the seminars. But the seminars are also intended to be a bit more hands-on, a bit more practical, a chance to get involved in activities, and sometimes they're individual activities or sometimes they're group activities, which will help you to get a different understanding of the topic than you would just hearing somebody else talk about it. The other type of class we tend to use is the tutorial. Here we break up the year into much smaller groups, usually one staff member for every 10 students, and these are intended to be a lot more discussion based, a chance for the students to talk to each other and ask questions and also get involved in discussions, something they might find a little bit harder to do in the bigger classes because it's more people and more intimidating. It's easier to do in the tutorial because there's both fewer students there, but also since it's the same students every week, you get to know them and you get to feel more comfortable around them. The other person you tend to get to know a bit better in the tutorials and the seminars is the tutor, because there's fewer students there, so you get more chance to talk to them and they get to know the students more individually. And this is an important part of our support system, that by getting to know the students, they're better able to know what support they need. And support is an important part of learning here in Hope, not just in education studies but in all the courses that are offered here. Support comes in the classes, but it also comes outside of the classes. So for example, any of the tutors are available for you to see outside of class time in their office hours, where you can drop in with questions or just needing support on any part of your studies. Also, you will be allocated a personal tutor, one person who effectively has only a few students, including yourself, as their responsibility for that year, and so is always there for you for any question you have when you're not sure who else to go to. So we think support is an important part of learning here at Hope. We still have high expectations of our students. We still expect people to come along and work hard, but we work just as hard as they do to support them. I'd like to talk to you now about the content on our degree and how we evaluate it. To do that, over this slide and the next two, I'm going to look at each of the 3 years of our undergraduate degree, and in each case I'm going to look at typical content for that year and the assessments we tend to use in that year. One thing you'll notice on each slide is that there's a section called Core 1 and another section called Core 2. The reason for that is that there are two ways to study education studies here at Hope University. You can study it as part of what's either called a combined honours or sometimes called a double major degree. In those kinds of degrees, you do two separate subjects. So education studies will be one of your subjects, and you'd spend 50% of your time with us and study our Core 1 content. But you'd also study a second subject. Examples for many of our students include things like early childhood studies or disability studies, and you would spend 50% of your time with that subject. And that's only one of the ways that you can choose to study education with us at Hope. The other option is to do what's called a single honours degree. And in that situation, you would spend 100% of your time with us in education studies, and you'd study not just the Core 1 content that the combined honours students do, but you'd also do Core 2 content, and that's for single honours students only. So when you're looking at these slides, think of Core 1 as something that anybody who studies education studies will do, whereas Core 2 is only for those people who are doing education studies in a single honours degree. So what kind of topics are you going to cover in Core 1 in first year? Well, as you can see, we give you, or aim to give you, a foundation in all 4 of the disciplines. So even if you've never studied those disciplines before, we take you from maybe knowing nothing at all about them to, by the end of the year, feeling you're capable about learning more about any one of them. Now, the topics we cover will be different for each of the 4 disciplines, but I'll give you 2 examples. In the history discipline, we tend to look at how history helps us to understand changes in education, how we see that changes in education are often driven by events in history. And we also look at how we know about history, whose voices do we hear and how do we hear them, because this gives us a way of seeing how history is sometimes told from a certain point of view. Another example would be in sociology, where we tend to look at the idea of whether or not education is fair. To what degree does everybody get the same chances in education, and are there differences in the opportunities get based on people's ethnicity or their gender or their religion? Now, in Core 2, we tend to look at major themes in education that stretch across many different areas of education, across all 4 of the disciplines I've talked about previously. And some examples of themes we look at would be things such as education occurring in many different places, so not just in school but in lots of other situations as well. And we might ask ourselves, how does what we learn and who we learn it from change depending on the situation you're in? So many people now learn things from the internet, and we would discuss issues such as fake news and search engines bringing up certain information because of paid promotions. Another thing we look at in the Core 2 content is we ask ourselves, how does policy affect education? Now, that could be policy at the level of the entire country, such as free school meals, or it could be policy at the level of a school, such as exclusion policy, who gets excluded for poor behaviour. And we ask, do these policies affect everybody equally, or are some people more affected than others? Now, in terms of assessments, we tend to use similar assessments on both sides of the degree. The kind of things we tend to use are usually an early assessment, which allows us to get a very quick feedback to people about how they're doing. We also tend to use things such as essays, which you'll be familiar with, portfolios, which are usually collections of smaller assignments that you do along the way, a kind of continuous assessment. And then we tend to have an end-of-year assessment. Now, often that's been an exam, but in recent years it has been replaced by another type of coursework which is just done at the end of the year, but the idea is to try and capture an overview of the entire year and what you've learnt in it. Moving into second year, in Core 1, which is for both combined and single honours students, we start to move on to more advanced concepts in each of the 4 disciplines. So you're still studying the 4 disciplines, but first year has kind of given you the foundation, the basics in each of the 4, so you're now ready for some more advanced concepts. An example of this might be in philosophy, you start talking about ethics. So ethics concerns how we decide what is right and wrong, how we make the choice of what is the right thing to do in a situation. So for example, if I'm faced with a student who's being disruptive in class, is it right for me to send them out of the class? Because even though they'll learn less, which is a bad thing, the class as a whole will learn more, and so more people benefit. Is that how we make that decision, and is that the right thing to do? Another example would be in psychology. You learn about cognitive psychology, which is how the mind works, how we remember things, issues like creativity and attention. So for example, why do I remember certain things rather than others? Why do I find it easier to remember phone numbers than maybe names and faces? Or what promotes creativity and what inhibits it? And is it creativity more important in some subjects than others? Does it matter more in art, for example, than in mathematics? A new topic you'll encounter in Core 1 at this year is research methods. So you'll be learning about how research is carried out. You'll learn how to evaluate research produced by other people, which is a big part of academia. But you'll also learn how to carry out your own research, how to decide what the research is about, how to gather data and analyse it. Now, looking at Core 2, which is for single honours students only, you start to encounter new themes here. One example of these themes would be education and the economy. To what degree is education there to stimulate economic growth, and does education really produce an economic benefit for people who attend school and university? Do they earn more? Another topic would be education and citizenship. How is education used to train people for citizenship, and who gets to decide what values and ideas about citizenship are communicated in that education? A new element in the Core 2 section of the course is the placement. This is something we organise, usually in consultation with you, to place you in an educational work environment for 6 to 8 weeks. And the idea here is not just that you get some work experience, but that you use this as an opportunity to research that work environment, to essentially take the theories and concepts you've been learning about in the course and apply them to a real workspace to see what they tell you about that workspace. In terms of the assessments used on both sides of the course at this level, there'll be familiar elements such as the essay, which you'll have encountered before, but there will be new things. So for example, in those research methods elements in Core 1, you'll now be expected to conduct some research methods assignments, things like a literature review or a data analysis, and those will be evaluated too here. There are also more conventional assessments such as exams, which are used again as the end of year assessment to try and get an overview of your learning the year as a whole. Moving on to final year, in the Core 1 section of the course, which is studied by both combined honours and single honours students, as the course is structured right now, you get to focus on 2 of the 4 disciplines. So effectively you get to pick whichever 2 you find are the most interesting or the most useful to you and study just those 2 disciplines for this section of the course this year. And the topics that you'll encounter in any of the disciplines are likely to be more advanced than the ones in second year. This is because at this point you're ready for the more advanced cutting edge stuff. And examples of the kind of topics you might encounter in this year: if you were to do history as one of your disciplines, you might encounter revolutions in history, how power tends to shift sometimes slowly or sometimes rapidly from one group to another, and how these shifts in power will often produce shifts in education too, that education is often a product of whoever is calling the shots. In psychology, you start to learn about social psychology, how we affect each other's behaviour, how we interact with each other, how belonging to certain groups such as national groups or your family or friendship groups can affect the behaviour of all the people in that group, and how these kind of issues can apply to education, how education is about belonging to a group or joining a group, and how the behaviour of the other people in that group, whether it's the teacher or the students, can affect you and affect what you're learning. Now, on the Core 2 side of the course, examples of new themes that you would encounter there include the idea of globalization in education. To what degree is education now a global phenomenon that people travel to other countries to learn? But is it also a case that education needs to be global in focus? Do students need to be learning more about things like sustainable development and climate change and disparity between rich and poor countries? And how much is our education curriculum servicing that or achieving that right now? Another example of a theme at this level would be education in the future. What is still to come? How will education change as technology moves forward, as people become even better able to access information through a network, such as through some kind of implant? What will a teacher do then when a student can simply think and search something on the internet in their mind? And what are less dramatic changes in education going forward? How might we look at education being made more available to a wider group of people, and what opportunities are there to do that? Examples of how the assessments at this level change: well, the most dramatic change is that you'll do a dissertation, which is sometimes known as a thesis. This is a major piece of research which is done by each student individually, and they are supported on a one-to-one level by a member of staff who is their supervisor, but it's the student who gets to decide what the topic of the research is about and who has to carry out all the hard work too, it should be recognised. But by being able to pick a topic themselves and give the research their own focus, they're able to focus on issues they're interested in, again, issues they think will be useful to them. Other assessments at this level are more conventional. You'll do essays, you may also do exams at this level. An interesting thing about the exams currently in the Core 2 section of the course is that they are oral exams, so that rather than writing your exam, you would go in and have an interview with one of the examiners, usually a member of staff, and through discussion answer the question rather than writing it down. One thing to note about examinations that's true across all 3 levels, not just in final year, is that the examination portion of your assessments is always a minority of your overall mark. That effectively, usually it's only a small percentage of your mark, maybe a quarter of your overall mark, that's decided by the exam, whereas usually the vast majority of the mark has already been decided in the coursework. In addition to the 3-year undergraduate degree that I've just described to you there, it is also possible to do a 4th year with us, a postgraduate year, part of what is called an integrated master's. And effectively what this would mean is that you would complete a 4th year of study with us, and in that year we would focus on more advanced concepts and concepts that explore the professional context of education, what it's going to be like to be out there in the workplace and the challenges that you'll face there. The sort of thing you might look at in this 4th year would include looking at how a professional educator has to negotiate and navigate issues such as educational policy and governance, or for example how an educational professional is expected to integrate research into their practice. As well as further studies, the fourth year, the integrated master's year, would involve a certain amount of placement. Now we will support you in securing that placement, but it also tends to be somewhere that the student can tailor and focus their own interests by identifying an area of placement that is most useful to them in their further career. And you can choose to do this fourth year of the integrated masters right from the start and sign up effectively from the very beginning for 4 years, 3 years undergraduate and 1 year integrated masters, or it can be something you can choose to do further down the line, such as when you're getting towards the end of your undergraduate degree, you can decide at that point that you want to stay on for the fourth year and complete the integrated masters. In terms of the facilities that you'll have available to you, there are many facilities across the campus, too many for me to list all of them here. I'm going to focus on 3 that you'll tend to use maybe more than others. One of those is the Lecture Theatre Complex, where most of the larger lectures take place. The second is the Eden Block, which tends to be the main block for the School of Education, and it's where most of your classes, the smaller classes like your tutorials and your seminars will take place. And then there's the Shepherd Warlock Library, which is the main library on campus. Now, if you get a chance to come on campus and see these buildings, you'll see what I'm talking about when I say that all of them are either relatively recently built or recently renovated, so that they are modern, comfortable, they've got the latest technology, and they've got the facilities that you need. And sometimes the facilities you need will just be some space, a place where you can set up your studies and focus on them. Or sometimes what you need will be technology, maybe will be access to the internet, the use of whiteboards, or maybe access to journal databases and the latest textbooks. Sometimes what you need is as much about what's not there. You'll want somewhere that it isn't busy, somewhere it isn't noisy, somewhere you can focus. And then other times you'll need somewhere you can relax a bit, somewhere you can share space with other people, get something to eat, sort of recharge your batteries in between classes or before heading off to complete some studies. Like I said, each of these buildings has the facilities that you will need, and if you get a chance to see them on campus before you come and study with us, I'd very much encourage you to do so you can kind of get a feeling for what it would like to be here. Whether you're with us for the 3 years of an undergraduate degree or 4 years of an integrated master's, eventually all good things must come to an end. And we think that it's at that point, at graduation, that one of the real strengths of our course emerges, which is that it opens so many doors for you post-graduation. There are so many careers in education you can go on to using our degree. In comparison with other degrees where there may only be a handful of careers they lead on to, for our course there are literally dozens of careers in education that our graduates have gone on to and then come back and told us about afterwards. Sometimes even we learn about new ones that are emerging as new technologies or new fields open up. Now, obviously, the most popular one for most of our graduates remains a career in teaching, and I would say about half of our graduates go on to choose that as their career, doing a PGC, which is the Postgraduate Teacher Training Qualification. And one of the things we really like is that when our graduates come back to us having done the PGC, they often tell us they were able to go straight into it post-graduation, and that when they got onto the teacher training course, they felt like they were almost a chapter ahead of all the other people on the course, that by having studied education with us first, they felt like they had a huge head start over everybody else who was training to become a teacher at that point. Now, if that's what you want to do, that opportunity will always be there, but keep in mind that half of our students who graduate go on to other careers out of their own choice. They realize that there are other ways to be an educator, and they come back to us with stories of feeling that they hadn't realized how those other careers could be just as fulfilling and give them just as much of an opportunity to help other people to learn and to grow as teaching would. So thankfully it won't be a choice you have to make straight away. It'll be the kind of choice you can think over for the 3 years that you're with us, and then at that point you can decide where is it you really want to go, and you'll appreciate how many opportunities you have at that point. The other thing we think you'll One of the Not all of the learning that you'll do on education studies will be in a lecture theatre or a seminar room. We try to use trips and visits to other locations as ways of offering a new perspective on learning, and we try to make them more than just a day out. The idea is that we want to gain something from visiting this other location that we couldn't just learn about by hearing about it or watching a video. And so sometimes it's about actually experiencing less conventional learning environments, figuring out how a museum or a courtroom could be used as a learning environment. And other times it's about the trip serving a double purpose. So for example, one of the opportunities you'll have in first year is to spend a 3-day residential down at the Place Cardian Outdoor Learning Centre. And part of the purpose of that is to learn a bit about outdoor learning, but the other purpose will be a chance to get to know some of the other people in your class, something that we find our first years really find is helpful and productive in making connections with other students. Sometimes these trips are on a much grander scale, although it's not guaranteed that this opportunity will crop up every year. We do occasionally have opportunities to visit learning institutions in other countries, and we always encourage our students to put themselves forward for trips like that because of the opportunity that they represent. The other big way in which you will find your learning sort of outside the classroom in an extracurricular sense is that we encourage all of our students to take up volunteering opportunities. When we hear about them, we'll publicise them among our students, but also there is the Employability Hub at Hope University, which is there to support students who want to get their own placements and volunteering opportunities outside the curriculum in extracurricular activities. And we very much encourage our students to do this. In conclusion, I'd like to thank you very much for listening. I hope this has given you a few new ways to think about education and hopefully a few good reasons why you might want to come and study education here with us in Hope. You can see some contact links and details here in the slide, so if you want to know more about our university or about this course, you can use them. Within the Hope website there will be a section for the Education Studies course which covers many of the things I've said in this presentation, but also some other details I won't have had a chance to get to. If you've got some questions specifically for the Education Studies team, you can use one of these general contact numbers or emails. Just let them know it's for the Education Studies team and they'll forward it on to us and we'll be happy to get back to you. Wherever the future takes you, we wish you all the best. Thank you again for listening and take care.